Welcome back. So today I'm reading chapter 1 from Climbing Maya, an exploration into success, my philosophical memoir, available on Amazon, iTunes, Barnes & Noble, Audible, all those book sites, in ebook, paperback, audiobook, every format, every flavor, every color combination. So today we're reading from chapter 1, and I'll begin. There's this painting of the Buddha. I've seen it 100 times. In it, he's holding a fiery sword over his head, and he has the most horrific expression. It's as though he's ready to chop you in half and take a bite out of your spleen. I was told once that this aspect of Buddha is meant to break through your ego wherever your ego gets in the way of your life. It's supposed to be a frightening image, you see? It's supposed to scare some sense into you. I can only intellectualize the concept, particularly because I tend to think it only applies to Kundalini yoga and afterlife exercises. I guess that's my wife moving around up there, trying not to be heard. I guess I didn't realize how much of this ego breaking is literally true here and now. The idea that my ego might be split while I'm still alive and using it doesn't exactly appeal to me. And in the summer of 2006, it was Buddha, and in the summer of 2006, which is now 14 years ago, it wasn't Buddha holding the blade. It was the events of my own life ready to cut my ego right out of me. I suppose I should start by telling you I lost my job. No, I didn't lose it. My placeholders just, the first couple days it was really useful, and then now it just gets in the way. I didn't lose it. It hadn't slid behind the refrigerator. It was taken from me by this vindictive little Nazi. The point is, I shouldn't have lost it. I was following every absurd order he gave me, and still he fired me. I had a double mortgage and a wife who was sure I'd find another job right away. And I was terrified I'd let her down. And mine wasn't the only life falling apart down here in Southern California. Two of my best friends needed my support when I couldn't afford to give any. Sean Deo was taking care of his sick wife, watching her die. Tim was drinking himself to death. I was chastising myself for the failure my life has resulted in, and how I'd never been successful. I thought I was alone in that. Just a quick note, Sean Deo, by the way, is a real name of my real friend who really said and did all of these things. He's a very interesting individual. I walked out of the squat, abused-looking office building in Foothill Ranch and into the heat. The sun had been scorching since July, and now it was mid-August. The box in my hands was filled with paper only moments before. I should have seen it coming. I knew it was coming. So why did I stand outside of the building, the door closing behind me like the gates of some malicious Eden, with the stupid look of a man who was just punched in the gut? My boss and I hadn't gotten along. I was too strident, and as a lack of luck would have it, so was he. He didn't like being told when he was wrong, and he especially didn't like how I proved it with ease. But he often was, and I felt I had built my career to such a point that my opinion should matter, and it should have been enough that I was right. So when he worked on squeezing me out, trying to make me quit, I should have seen it coming. He overloaded me with work to such a degree that he became even more infuriated when I handled the workload. He set rules that were He set rules that were unusually absurd for someone who had advanced as far as I had. Rules that discount store employees are often expected to follow. And my prompt and obedient response to them drove him mad. I couldn't park my car in the lot. My brakes were monitored with a stopwatch. I was quizzed about the workings of other departments and disciplined when I could not immediately provide the expected answers. The result was what you might expect of someone running out of options. His blood pressure went up, his seething anger burst, and he couldn't hold it any longer. That went on for more than a month. It was a fun job. Then the finale came on the day after I called in sick. I took my sick day due to a bizarre flu that, while causing me to display no traditional symptoms, laid me out like a kicked kitten. Probably stress. When I returned, I was still sick. I could barely walk around the office. But I followed his rules because I needed my job. I'm sure there's a lot of people who can relate to this right about now. After lunch, he walked up to my desk and told me to follow him to Human Resources. We walked in. He closed the door behind us. I gave a tired greeting to the Human Resources manager. He sat down. Without taking a breath, he announced, "We're letting you go." "Huh?" I muttered. "We don't need you anymore. You no longer work here. If you need a reason, we'll call it productivity." "I have a packet with information on COBRA and unemployment benefits," the Human Resources manager told me, her face betraying no emotion. Looking from one to another, I didn't know what to say. Obviously, it was too late to fix whatever problems had spoiled this relationship. I'd experienced the same feeling at the end of my first marriage. It was too late to do anything. So I asked them, "Are you going to give me a box to pack my stuff in?" My boss said nothing more. He walked to the copy machine and upended a new box of paper, leaving stacks of paper packs behind. He then thrust the empty box at me as though he wanted to hit me with it. I packed up my desk, and without even looking at him, I walked out. I could hear his footsteps behind me as I went, but as the exterior door slammed behind me, I knew he hadn't followed me out. I was alone out there. They didn't have to worry about my remaining on the property. Anyway, my car was parked up the hill, overlooking an empty canyon. The heat just hammered down on me as I stood on the concrete. But I didn't want to walk to my car. I knew that once I did, I'd have to call my wife and tell her what happened. The reasons for my termination varied, but I can tell you exactly what it came down to. My boss and I didn't like each other much. He was an unserious man in a serious position, director of marketing for a struggling electronics company in Southern California. He was more interested in being pals with the crew than focusing his marketing message and finding creative ways of getting it out with fewer and fewer dollars. And I was the marketing writer, a serious man in an unserious job. I was the guy who wrote all of the marketing material. and I watched him piss away opportunity after opportunity to get it seen in the market. Nope, neither of us cared much for the other. By the time I got to my car, I knew it would be like a furnace inside. I didn't want to open the door. So I set the box down on the street and pulled out a nearly empty pack of smokes. I'd been smoking behind my wife's back. She didn't want me to smoke, but with all the pressure at work, well, it was reason enough for me. So I sat on the curb, lit my cigarette, and waited. I was waiting for one of my friends to come out before I left. I had a lot of friends there, the graphic artist, the IT guy, one of the salespeople, a stock guy. I expected them to come out any minute. See, the thing about writing, we're going to get to this eventually anyway. The thing about writing is it's one of the most personal things there is in business. It's language and the words you choose that define the message you're trying to get across. We all speak differently, and yet I was always the one writing that message through several companies. I'd been doing that for almost a decade. It was how I made a living. At least, it used to be. Anyway, that's another reason my boss and I couldn't stand each other. I was ready to write the company's gospel, and he hadn't even discovered religion. God, it was hot. Sweat ran down my shirt like someone had set off the sprinklers, and I could see lines of perspiration turning the white cotton transparent. And nobody was coming out to say goodbye. I didn't bother getting in my car. I didn't bother putting out the cigarette. Instead, I pulled out my phone and dialed my wife's number. Vicky answered. "This is Vicky." She's a paralegal, very professional, very poised, an executioner with a smile and pumps. "Honey? Hi." I took a breath. "Listen, I just lost my job. They just fired me." Vicky didn't pause. She said, "Okay, well, go home and take it easy." "I'm sorry, hon. I know it's not your fault. It'll be okay. I just feel so rotten." "Don't, honey. We'll be fine. I love you." "I love you." We said our goodbyes, and I hung up. Where do you go at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a work day when normally you'd be at work? My commute took me far from home, and I was on the side of Orange County I usually didn't get a chance to see. But I didn't feel like seeing it. I just wanted to get away. I just drove, following the same route that took me home, but I didn't want to go home. Sitting in my empty condo was only going to make me crazy. After all, when I had a job, I couldn't afford better for my new wife and the child we were now going to have to put on hold. And now, I didn't even have that. Driving through the foothills of eastern Orange County, which was busily developing the first signs of housing projects, I ran through the short list of people I knew. There was Tim, who lived in San Diego, which was also being broiled under this angry summer. And heat was the last thing I craved. Next, I considered paying my mom a visit, and I decided to cut that out right away. I was raised by my mom, an old-fashioned, don't be too ambitious, get a job and raise a family kind of household, along with my two siblings, Keith and Audrey. Both had more or less tried to follow her rules, while I tried, and failed, to be an actor and a writer and a husband on top. After one divorce and a failed acting career, did I want to make the first stop of my afternoon at my mother's house, confirming what had happened to my writing career, what had happened when one of her children didn't follow her rules? No. And there was only one person left on my list. Oh, I knew a few people, but most of them were Vicky's friends. And I keep a mental ledger. I keep a Heath ledger about those things. Her friends, my friends. I didn't want to incorporate the phrase, remember me, with my request for support. But that last person, as I drove my car out of the foothills and into Orange, newly developed and full of phone coverage, I dialed the phone. Usually, Sean screened his calls, but this time, presciently, almost, he picked up. Yellow. Sean, hey. Hey, he repeated with far more enthusiasm. Listen, I said. And he did. I didn't go home. I steered my car to his place, ready to kick myself once I got out and was able. The thing about Sean is that, well, I'm not supposed to use him for support. I'd done that once. Now, I was supposed to be there for him. Fine job I was doing. Sean and I were still pretty new at friendship, though we'd known each other for 2 decades. The way it happened was that his wife was my ex-wife's best friend. When my ex and I began dating, Sean and his wife, then girlfriend, had also come into my life. We married at about the same time. My ex-wife and I laughed behind their backs, filled with certainty in our own marital bliss and condescension towards theirs. They were never as affectionate as we, or filled with interesting stories, or as filled with interesting stories. Our marriage always had problems and fell like Jericho after 12 years. My life fell apart. And Sean's wife, Megan, was diagnosed with leukemia. And Sean stood right by her side. When I first heard about Megan's diagnosis, I did something different from all the wallowing I'd been taking part in. I decided to think of someone else for a change. Sean and I had never really been friends. We'd been the dates our wives had along when they'd gone out. We knew each other that way. Well, I decided that if Sean would stick it out, then I would stick it out with him. I thought of myself as his wingman, and I always tried to be there for him. I was kidding myself, though. The truth was that as I went through my divorce, he helped me get through the depression that came with it. I was there for his support, and he provided it even as Megan went through chemo and radiation therapy. By the time she had bone marrow transplant, 2 years later, I was doing better. And when I met and later married Vicky, I realized just how much he'd helped me make it through. We had expected Megan to fully recover after the transplant. Sean doted on her, even after she returned from the hospital. He saw to it she had everything. But even with the best care and all of his love, we soon found that she was suffering from graft versus host disease. In the most simplistic of layman's terms, it meant that her body was rejecting the transplant. Only about 42% of patients recovered. Sean redoubled his efforts. Megan fought the disease. That became their life. So who the hell was I to lean on his shoulder? I drove into his mobile home park and saw him waiting for me on his porch. I parked my car and I stepped out, saw him approach. "Tell me," he said, "what happened?" He knew most of the story. I told him the rest. There was no surprise there. We all saw it coming. I'll look for work this weekend and hope I can get unemployment. Unemployment insurance wouldn't provide the same amount of income I'd enjoyed, but it would certainly help. "The thing is," he said, "you might not get unemployment. They fired you. You may not be eligible. Even if it wasn't my fault, even so, you'll probably have to appeal it. That could take weeks, months." I knew I didn't have months. It wasn't exactly great news. I pulled out my cigarettes, finding only one left. I normally smoked little. Today would be different. "I need to get cigarettes," I told him. So we got into his car and we drove to a nearby smoke shop. "How's Megan doing today?" I asked. Megan's condition was a day-to-day kind of thing. To fight the graft versus host, her doctor had put her on, and this is going to be a drug name, and I apologize for the mispronunciation, tacrolimus. Tacrolimus? I'm going to say tacrolimus. Tacrolimus. Tacrolimus, in case you wanted to know how that's pronounced, along with a cocktail of other drugs to improve her general state. The problem was that after it started working, Megan felt she was better and took it upon herself to stop taking the drug. Then she got worse. Recently, her doctor had insisted she again take the tacrolimus and stay on it, and we were all hoping it would help. Signs weren't good. Not only had her lungs grown weak, requiring her to be connected to an oxygen tank with more and more frequency, until she couldn't get around without it, but her appetite was non-existent, and it was a daily ordeal for Sean to get her to eat. "Today," he replied, "same as always." His response was unemotional. Being on such a roller coaster forced him to deal with his beloved's health in an almost matter-of-fact manner. "Has she eaten?" "She had a little oatmeal and a bit of juice." We both agreed that she could eat like a pig and should eat like a pig to improve her strength. Hearing about this meager amount made my gut hurt. We picked up a pack of cigarettes with all the speed of a couple choosing China. I was trying to find things to joke about, to lighten his mood, and he was doing the same for me, until, with some irritation, the dark-skinned girl behind the counter, wearing a tight-fitting t-shirt, asked, "What did you want?" Outside, I tore the cellophane wrapper from the pack of smokes and lit the first one I pulled out. "I'm hungry," Sean decided. "You want something to eat?" I shouldn't spend the money. My treat. But neither of us was enthusiastic about eating. We ordered food. As though obliged, we shoveled in one mouthful after another, his seasoned with ashes and mine with poverty. A lot was left on the table, and we didn't even think of taking it home. Anyway, Sean had to get back. He didn't like leaving Megan alone for too long. You never could tell what would happen. And as far as she'd slipped from his grasp, he wouldn't risk it. So he went back into his mobile home as the sun set with relief, leaving the baked city to relish in a few hours of cool darkness. Air conditioners would be switched off for a little while. For some, sleep would come. I watched Sean walk back inside as I lit another cigarette, and I wondered, is this what he expected back on the playgrounds of his youth? Did he consider his life ahead as one filled with adventures and intrigue, excitement and amusement and amazement? Or did he look forward to taking care of his dying beloved, wondering how much longer she had, watching her waste away? I considered his attention to his wife a fine and noble thing. I wondered what he thought of it. When I was a boy, I expected a life filled with pleasures, acting on the stage or the screen, writing novels. And yet, I stood there, a pudgy, middle-aged man of 40, unemployed, dreams untouched. Not what I had expected. And so ends Chapter 1 of Climbing Maya, an exploration into success. What is success? Find out in Climbing Maya, available all over, the whole world over, in ebook, Amazon. No, that's a different. I am so tired from reading, I can't talk. But it's an audiobook. It's in paperback. It's not in paperback. Aha. And it's an ebook. And I'll catch you tomorrow for a little more light reading. Bye. And there you have it. You've just survived another Ken LaSalle video. For more information about new releases, projects in the works, or even stuff from the archives, head on down to kenlasalle.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Twitter, and all around social media, just as long as it's called Facebook or Twitter. Thanks for your support, as always. Be sure to subscribe to this channel, and I'll be back soon with more nonsense.